Hello, my name is Zach Gibbs, and I'm a content developer within education services inside Juniper Networks. And today we will be discussing the Configuring AppFormix Static Alarm Rules Learning Byte. All right, so let's go ahead and jump to our example. Here we have in the diagram you can see on the slide, we have a few different nodes. We have the AppFormix controller, the OpenStack node, which houses the SDN controller functions, and Compute 1 and Compute 2, the compute nodes house the vRouter functions in this Contrail fabric, and they have VM instances running on those compute nodes. So they're talking back and forth the VM instances and whatnot. We want to configure a static alarm rule with the following criteria. We want to include all VM instances, so we're going to be monitoring all of the instances in the fabric or the cluster. And then what we want to monitor for is we want to monitor for high CPU utilization. And we want to raise an alarm when the CPU utilization rate is above 90%. And we're going to set that severity to critical. We're not going to have any sort of notification services involved. And so with that, let's go ahead and jump right to the AppFormix GUI and get started on this. All right, so here is the AppFormix GUI, and we can see we're under the dashboard workspace. And in the navigation bar, we are looking at the infrastructure view. We can see a few different things here. We can see the management infrastructure, we can see the physical infrastructure, and we can see the virtual infrastructure. And you can see under the virtual infrastructure that we do have 10 instances, that would be 10 virtual machines that are running in our infrastructure. Let's look at the overall CPU utilization currently in charts, and then we can set up an alarm to monitor the instant CPU usage. So let's go ahead and go to aggregates. Now, previously, I set up an aggregate that has all the VM instances. And so it'll be easy for us to look at all of them together. So that's right here. We can click the chart shortcut to go to the charts for it. All right, so here is the charts. We can see the first chart we see is the instance CPU usage in percentage. So we can mouse over that and we can see they're all relatively low, around 2%, close to 3% usage. So nothing special going on there. And the great thing now that we're in the charts workspace, instead of going to the alarms workspace on the left, there's a shortcut that we could interact with the alarms workspace inside the charts workspace. And if we click the ribbon on the right to expand it, that expands a shortcut to the alarms workspace. And the cool part about this is you can still see the charts workspace in the background. And so we'll be able to see some things when it happens, and that'll be fun to see. All right, so let's go ahead and click the add rule button to get started. And we're going to call this, let's call this CPU instance high. So high CPU usage for the instance. We're going to set that to alarms module, rule type static. We're good there. Now the scope, this needs to change it. Right now it has hosts. We want to change this to instance. And that'll change the different type of metrics that we have available for us. And the project aggregate, it says all, we could leave that at all, that's fine, or we could select instances all-hosts. That's the aggregate I set up. And so let's go ahead and select that aggregate that was previously set up. We could leave this at all, and it's going to have the same effect, but it's nice to show a difference. Okay, so under generate, we will say generate alert instead of event. Then the metric, now this is where we have to select the correct metric here. And we want to select instance CPU usage. Now, notice how there is an instance CPU host underscore usage metric as well. If we were to select that, that would only monitor the actual physical host usage. So in this instance, it would be the CPU usage of Compute 1 and Compute 2. That's not what we want in this instance. So let's go ahead and just select the instance.cpu.usage metric. And we'll say when, we'll say max. Now we're setting the interval. I'm going to set this down a little lower, 15 seconds. That might be a little low for a production environment. However, the reason why we're doing this is so we can get an alarm showing up quickly. We don't have to wait a long time since this is a Learning Byte. And so we'll set the is field to, so it's above a max. So when max interval 15 seconds is above what? Now we want to set a threshold here. We said 90%. I believe it was 90%. It was either 90 or 95. 90% sounds right. And the severity, oops, I'm changing that with the scroll button or scroll button. The scroll on the mouse. And severity, we want to set that to critical. Now, the severity is just what shows up locally here in AppFormix. And then the notification service, we're going to leave that at none. We could set that to something. We could configure the notification services under the settings option and then use a notification service. We're not doing that right now. And then the last bit, if we select the advanced option and scroll down, we can see a few different things here. We have the ability to start this as enabled or disabled. Now that can be useful if you don't want to have the alarm run right away. You can set that to disabled and then enable it later. And then we also have the intervals with exception and of last intervals. And so what does that mean? That might be a little confusing. And so with that, we need to reference back to the interval seconds field. Now the interval seconds field shows how long an interval is, how many seconds. So that relates to the intervals with exception and of the last intervals field. Because what's going to happen is every 15 seconds is for this alarm rule is going to be considered an interval. So there needs to be one interval with exception, since we have it set to 1, of the last 1 intervals. Basically how this works out, if there's any exceptions, this criteria, if there's 90% CPU utilization for an instance with, for 15 seconds at all, it will raise the alarm. Now we could change that. We could say intervals with exception, set that to 2, of last intervals 3. So that means there needs to be, if we were to do that with our interval set to 15 seconds, that means there would need to be 30 seconds of CPU usage of the last 3 intervals. So that would mean 30 times 3 is what we would actually have. And that equals out to be 90 seconds of high CPU utilization to raise that alarm. Now that can be really useful if you think about it. It's fairly common to have a workload jump up, just spike and then come back down. Do you really want an alarm for that? Maybe, maybe not, depending on your situation. Maybe you want an alarm to only be raised if CPU utilization has been above 90% for, I don't know, like 3 minutes. And then you could change how long an interval is in seconds. And then you could also change intervals with exception of last intervals as well. You could change those fields to compensate for that. But in our example, we want the alarm to be raised as quickly as possible because this is a learning byte. We don't want to waste a lot of time. Okay, so with that being said, let's go ahead and click Save. And we'll see some changes to the charts when we do that. Go ahead and close this ribbon. And you can see, there it goes. At the bottom here, there's a dot. We can click on it, and we can see some information. And with that, we can see that this is the CPU instance high alarm running for less than 1 minute, or the time ago that this was instantiated was less than 1 minute. It is learnings in the learning state. And so when you see that circle, that means it's in the learning state. And it gives us a description and the metric type and things like that. Now, there's also, we look closely, there's also an arrow here. And the arrow means that the alarm is in the inactive state. So it went to the learning state. It learned that none of the instances had a high CPU utilization. So it went to the inactive state. That's perfect. That's what we want to see. So let's open up that alarm panel again. And we can see that we can see the alarm here, but we're going to see this in the inactive state. And that's perfect. Everything's in the inactive state because nothing's high. Now, you might notice that it shows 11 CPU instance, or 11 of the CPU instance high alarms. You may wonder yourself, we have 10 instances. Why does it show 11? Well, if we go back, we'll see that one of the entries shows that it's in the learning state. And that's when it was in the learning state, and then it transitioned into the inactive state for all the instances. So perfect, that's what we want to see. So let's create some high CPU utilization and see what happens. All right, so here is the OpenStack GUI. We're gonna get into a console of an instance. All right, here are our instances. Let's go ahead and just select the first one we see. That's the C-C2-4 instance. We'll select console. All right, so we're already logged into this console, and we just need to run this command, the dd if or if equals dev/0 of equals /dev/null. And so we run that command, and that will cause the CPU utilization to skyrocket. Now, this is a command that will also create high disk usage as well. It also creates high CPU utilization for the instance, so this works perfect. So let's go ahead and hit enter there. Then let's go ahead and jump back to the AppFormix GUI and see what's happening. All right, here's the AppFormix GUI, and we can see we already have an active alarm. We can see up top that there is one alarm active, and we can see on the right that the CPU instance high alarm is active. We can see in the middle as well that we have that alarm active for the C-C2-4 instance. That's what we want to see. And so let's go ahead and close this or shrink it. We can see that this instance is skyrocketing up. It's over 90%. And we can also see down here, if you look down low at the bottom of the graph, you can see that there's a triangle pointing to the right. That means that an alarm has been triggered. We can click on that triangle, and then we can see up here that it actually shows what's happening. We can see that we have that alarm triggered, the CPU instance high, severity set to critical. Time ago, it was 1 minute ago, state active, CPU usage, gives you some more information on it. And it shows that it's running at 100%. And so if we go back to the alarm, we can see that it's running. It's not showing 100% yet, but it will show that. It will catch up. As far as what the charts show, it's just skyrocketing up. So it'll just take a minute. And there it goes. We see it's showing 100% now on the charts. There's a little bit of time delay there when it shows up on the charts versus when it's reported. But suffice it to say, we saw the alarm go off immediately. That alarm says immediately 100% utilization. And so we can see that, yes, it is 100% utilization for that individual instance. And so let's go ahead and jump back to the alarms panel here. And we can see that the alarm is still active. That's what we want to see. Now we can select the individual alarm. We can hover over it and it gives us a description of what the alarm is about. It says generate instance alert for instances in the instances all hosts for CPU usage of max over 15 second duration interval is above 90 and one of last one interval. So it gives you some information there. Now you can click the gear icon and we'll get some more specific information about what is the alarm configured for, the different parameters. And you can look through that. It's basically what we configured earlier, and it gives you a little more information such as the aggregate ID and the rule ID. And so the other things you can do too is you can duplicate this rule. If I mouse over this icon here, we can see duplicate alarm. So we'll duplicate that alarm rule. Then we can make changes to it. Makes it a very efficient way to edit it. You can't actually edit the rule, but you can duplicate it and then edit it to make a different rule. So keep that in mind. Here we can add a notification service. And then we can also show notifications. Now, we don't have any notification services configured, so we're not going to show any notifications. And then we could also delete the alarm. And the last thing I want to show, we go ahead and click off that to get rid of it. We can disable the alarm by clicking that toggle button. And then the alarm goes into the disabled state. And that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to happen. We can re-enable it, and it'll go into the learning state, and then into the inactive state for most instances. And then that one instance will go into the active state. And there it goes. The one instance, the C-C2-4 instance, is in the active state. The other instances are not. And that's because it's the only instance with high CPU utilization. So that brings us to the end of our Learning Byte. We discussed how to configure static alarm rules, and we demonstrated how to verify static alarm rules. And so, as always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses. Learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths. Juniper Network's certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence. And the training community, from forums to social media. Join the discussion.